Wife avoided my calls by pretending to answer another one. Her lies became my fault, yet we both faced separation. My wife and I have been married for 7 years, together for 10. We both share a passion for motorcycles. Riding is in our blood, but we're often zipping around the city separately. She especially loves going out on late night rides over the weekends. At first, I tried to keep my cool, but I won't pretend I didn't worry when my wife disappeared into the night on her bike, often, without so much as a heads up. Honestly, what husband wouldn't be anxious? Watching the clock tick past midnight and not hearing from her gnawed at me, and I didn't think it was too much to want to know where she was. Bringing it up always sparked heated arguments. She accused me of smothering her, insisted I was needy for wanting her to check in. You don't have to know my every move, she'd snap. We ended up in therapy over it and, shocker, our own therapist raised an eyebrow at her disappearing ex. Still, my wife never truly saw that anything was wrong. A few weekends ago, things reached a boiling point. She was out again, late, and I texted, just asking if she was getting dinner. She shot back, "Yeah, I'm good, thank you, love you." That's it, no details, even though darkness was falling. I wanted more than that. After a while, I texted, "Sweet. I'm gonna be home for the night, what you up to?" Silence. I pressed, probably stubbornly, "I really dislike when you don't care to tell me what you're doing out on a Friday night." Predictably, this stoked another argument. She finally said she'd talk to me later and went back to riding her bike. But my gut screamed that something wasn't right. Something snapped in me. I drove over to her favorite late-night eatery. I had to know. Her bike was parked outside but stone cold to the touch, even though less than 10 minutes had passed since she'd claimed to slam her brakes to respond to me. I walked inside, and there she was, sitting at the bar. I felt sick. I left quickly, just sending her a text to let her know I'd been there, the truth hanging between us. This blew up into another huge fight, but after the dust settled, she promised to be more mindful, said she'd check in. That wasn't the real issue, just a sign of deeper rot. Then came the real storm. Last weekend she was working at a local cafe/bar, checking in at first but letting it fizzle out as the night wore on. She claimed she needed to head to her office and finish some work. That's the last I heard from her. After a late gym session, I called her. No answer. She called me back minutes later. The background of our call was busy, voices audible, and she was speaking in this strange, distant way. Then, she abruptly cut me off, saying she had to take another call, something important about a home offer we'd put in, supposedly from the seller's agent. Of course, I waited for her to call back. Nothing. An hour ticked by before I reached out again. She texted, "Call you in a few." When she finally called, she was in her car, explaining at length about her conversation with the agent and checking some numbers with our lender. It just didn't add up. The details didn't fit. My suspicion gnawed at me. "Where were you when I called?" I asked. She insisted, "I'm driving now." I pulled over to talk to the seller's agent. But I remembered the sounds in the background. She couldn't explain them, and I let it drop, even though it felt all wrong. Later that night, I told her straight, I need her to level with me. I wanted her to admit it if she'd lied, but she just let it hang in the air between us. I couldn't let it go. I checked the phone records. My stomach dropped. After my call, there were no calls to or from her phone, only hours of silence. She pretended to get a call just to get away from me, lied right to my face. When I confronted her, she told me she'd wanted to hang out with friends and didn't want to deal with my reaction. She said it was easier to lie. The apology she gave me was barely stitched together. "I'm sorry I lied to you." But then came the kicker. She blamed me for her dishonesty. I was too insecure, she said. I didn't trust her. She said I didn't give her breathing room. Somehow, her lie had turned into my fault. We were at an impasse. She justified her lie, I felt betrayed, and the conversation went nowhere. I felt both hurt and guilty, like I'd done something wrong by wanting transparency, and I didn't know how to trust her anymore. These emotions ripped through me, and honestly, it's been excruciating. I wouldn't wish this on anyone. While I was wrestling with all of this, I stayed at an Airbnb to give us both space. She was furious at first, but quickly realized we needed this break. Alone, I had time to reflect, time to journal, to untangle the mess in my head. After a week, I came home and we finally had our heart-to-heart. What surprised me was that we both approached the idea of separating, equally and calmly. I don't believe she was cheating, and I'm sure it wasn't substance abuse, though those suspicions nagged at me. At this point, it doesn't matter. What this really is a textbook case of two people who simply don't fit together anymore. We fought tooth and nail to save our marriage for years, and now the hardest part to bear is the sharp ache of failure. The beautiful memories keep coming back, sometimes so vivid it hurts. Our early moments together come back to me in powerful waves, sometimes overwhelming me and manifesting as tears I can't always hold back. The grief of our loss hits both of us, but never at the same time or in the same way. There's always that lingering uncertainty. Could we have made it work if we'd tried harder, changed something, held on a bit tighter? Maybe, with enough time, those doubts will quiet down to a gentle whisper rather than a daily roar. Where we are now is, surprisingly, peaceful. We've managed to be amicable at this stage, finding a strange new camaraderie in the shared experience of moving on. We're trying not to cling to the remnants of a friendship that grew out of our marriage but instead to see if we can rebuild something new from the ashes, something fresh, no longer burdened by all the old expectations. I can feel our dynamic shifting, even healing, and I'm cautiously optimistic that this is a glimpse of what the future might hold for us. Now, as I prepare to close on my own home, I catch myself holding my breath. There's a trace of fear in the solitude that lies ahead, an unsettling quiet that I'm not sure I'll enjoy. But that fear is already being overshadowed by a sense of opportunity. I get to rebuild myself, to rediscover what makes me feel alive and whole. The journey ahead feels daunting, yes, but also hopeful. I'm looking forward to learning who I am when I stand alone, and maybe, one day, even loving that person. And above all, I wish her nothing but the best as she carves out her own path. Update 1. I'm a 35-year-old man, and I wanted to offer one last update on this saga that is my failed marriage. After much back and forth, my wife, also 35, and I decided to separate, amicably, or so I thought. Honestly, it was the healthiest choice either of us could have made, and what I just experienced only makes me more confident that moving forward is the right path to finally find my peace. For years, I was always the consistent income in our household. Her industry is seasonally dependent, and even though I wanted to just leave, I felt this responsibility, not to just ditch her to figure out survival completely on her own. When we finally agreed to part ways, she suggested we separate but still live under the same roof until next May. That way, she'd have the safety net she needed to push into her busy summer work season. I couldn't do it. There was no way that wouldn't further poison our already toxic relationship. I needed to break away, to heal and rebuild my life, which had been totally decimated by that point. So I decided to buy my own house, but still offered to help her financially until she made enough to start her new life. The first week or so after I closed on the new place, we were surprisingly decent toward each other, cordial, even slipping into a kind of friendship. My new house was absolutely barren. I literally celebrated the purchase of a new couch because, until then, all I had was a wooden bar stool and a worn-out rug from my old home. You really don't appreciate a comfortable place to sit after work until that's all you have. We still did little acts of good faith for each other, but after a few days, communication just went dark. To be expected, I guess. The serenity of my new home was amazing, and for the first time in years, I actually felt a love for myself growing back. Not talking to her was a breath of relief. One thing I wanted to make right before I fully stepped away was the water heater leak at her house, my old house, which I still own. When I noticed it after moving out, I called a plumbing company to fix it. My job's busy, and honestly, just stepping back into that home breaks my heart. But the plumbers canceled twice, and I was getting impatient. I decided to handle it myself. I let her know I'd be stopping by, and she was fine with it. I'm decent at plumbing, and figured it would be quick work. When I got there, I diagnosed a pinhole leak, drained the lines, cut out the bad section, and patched things up. Done. Her trash can was out in the garage, and I needed a spot to toss the wreckage from my little repair job. I open the lid, and what do I see? A box full of used condoms. My heart absolutely sank. I've been out of that house barely a week. Still legally married, and there I was, fixing her place and continuing to support her financially so she'd have a soft landing. At that moment, I knew deep in my gut that I no longer wanted to be a part of this. I just needed to be free of all this misery. I texted her a photo of the water heater with a simple "good as new. If you wouldn't mind, just keep an eye on it for the next day or so." Eventually, she replied with a thank you and a little heart emoji. I told her to call me tomorrow so we could chat. My heart was racing for hours. I had experienced some absolutely insane lows these past few months, but this was by far the worst. I just needed food and a quiet night to regroup. Well, she couldn't wait. She called. She has real anxiety about those call me text messages, and I did know that, but I truly needed the night for myself. Still, my phone rang. I told myself, guess we're doing this. I started by letting her know the water heater was good to go, and suggested she might want to have a professional look at it within the year. Then I said, the next part of this conversation will be difficult. I didn't come right out and say I found evidence she was already hooking up with someone new. I just told her, I know you've moved on, and I know how you've chosen to do so. Then, I explained I'd be removing myself from all shared accounts, and from here on she'd have to manage on her own. Boy, was she livid. She immediately shot back with the gaslighting and accusations, even called my character into question, claiming she thought I was a person of honor and respect. She tried to argue that we'd agreed to having our needs met. In her mind, apparently her physical needs ranked higher than, I don't know, financial security or even the basic respect of a soft landing after a decade-long marriage and the promise of friendship. She tried to argue, to twist things around, but I wasn't having it, so why lay all this out now? For one, it marks the true end of this chapter. This is the worst I'll ever feel about any of this. It's only up from here, more healing, more growth. Also, while I never had any solid evidence before, the speed at which she jumped into bed with someone else after I moved out makes me wonder if all those suspicions I'd shrugged off before weren't totally unfounded. And honestly, I just need to vent. To top it all off, only a few hours before all this, I had to put down my beloved cat, who had cancer. What a day. Either way, I am so relieved to leave all of that behind. I desperately want to believe I'm making the right decision by cutting all ties. But part of me lingers on this question: did she owe it to me to put off her urges until we'd split finances? I can't help but wonder. Whatever the case, it's time for healing, for growth, and for peace. Update 2. The night after that phone call, I thought the universe might give me a quiet one. I made a sad excuse for dinner, sat on my brand new couch like a king on a cardboard throne, stared at the empty spot where my cat would have been, and tried to let my brain empty. I was asleep by 10. At 2:14 a.m., my phone lit up with an unknown number. I don't know why I answered. Muscle memory, maybe. The voice was calm, professional, and it used my name. She'd been in a motorcycle accident, low speed, someone turned across her lane. She was conscious but in pain, and I was still listed as her emergency contact. They needed someone to sign if things took a turn. I was in shoes and in the truck before she finished the sentence. Hospitals at night make time bend. Everything is too bright and too still, and yet there's this undertow of urgency humming through the tiles. They brought me back, and there she was, helmet hair, road rash on the shoulder, eyes glassy with pain meds, collarbone at a wrong-looking angle beneath a paper gown. When she saw me, her mouth trembled just a fraction, like she couldn't decide which emotion to land on. Relief? Embarrassment? Anger that I'd shown up? I didn't know. I just know my feet kept moving until I was next to the bed. "Hey," she said, small. "Hey," I said back, because there was nothing else. A nurse came in with forms, insurance, next of kin, decisions that feel ridiculously bureaucratic. At 2:30 a.m. she was lucid enough to sign her own stuff. I handed over our insurance card because it was still ours, for now. Then I told the nurse, without looking at my wife, I'm not her emergency contact anymore. The nurse was kind and didn't pry, she just nodded and asked who to list. I glanced at my wife. Her eyes flicked toward the curtain and down again. "He's in the waiting room," she whispered. I met him 2 minutes later. I'd seen his face before in passing, at a bike meet maybe, but I'd never put a name to it. Tall, a little too clean-cut for our crew, a nice jacket with fresh scuffs on the shoulder where he must have slid catching her bike. He stood up when I stepped into the waiting area and managed this very careful, neutral expression people paste on when they're not sure if they should offer a handshake or a fighting stance. I did him the favor and put my hand out. I started. "I know," he said, taking it. His grip was warm and a little unsteady. I brought her in. I didn't know if. "It's okay," I said, and I meant it, weirdly. "They want your info for emergency contact. Insurance is covered for now. She's going to be sore and pissed, but she'll be okay." He swallowed and nodded. "She told me you were separated," he said, like an apology. "We are," I said. We sat in the same row of plastic chairs with a seat between us. He kept glancing at the swinging doors. I stared at a machine that sold the saddest coffee on earth. The quiet between us wasn't hostile. It wasn't friendly. It just existed, and that felt like a miracle after months of every silence being loaded like a gun. When I went back to see her again, she was more awake, the drugs spinning in slow circles behind her eyes. "You didn't need to come," she said, gentler than I expected. "I know," I said. "I came to make it official." Then I told her, right there, that in the morning I was filing the papers. No more separation in theory. No more soft landings. Real, legal, cut clean truth. I told her I'd keep the insurance active through the end of the month so this didn't turn into a catastrophe, and then she was on her own. I told her I'd be listing the old house. 60 days, and then the chapter ends. It wasn't delivered like a punishment. It was just facts spoken into a room that had run out of anything but facts. She stared at the ceiling for a long time. "Okay," she said. A single tear slid from the corner of her eye into her hairline. "Okay." On my way out, I stopped at the nurse's station and gave them the new emergency contact. I watched the nurse type his name into a field where mine had been for 10 years and felt something unhook inside me. It didn't feel like loss anymore. It felt like plumbing, closing a valve, hearing the clank, waiting for the pipes to stop rattling. I didn't go home right away. I drove to the river overlook where we used to end night rides when everything between us was easy and our biggest problem was who had to wake up earlier the next day. I killed the engine, let the truck take as it cooled, and locked my hands around the wheel until my knuckles whitened. The city was spread out below like a map I didn't recognize. I cried once, one hard, ugly sound I didn't expect, and then it was gone. I sat there until the sky started to think about morning, and then I went home to a house that still smells like paint and cardboard and whatever new is supposed to smell like. The rest moved fast because it had to. I filed. I met with a mediator whose office had a bowl of stale peppermints and a poster about conflict resolution that must have been printed in 2006. I called the bank and the utilities and the phone company and said words like separate, remove, terminate and felt each one land, like a small, necessary hammer. I texted her realtor about listing the old place. 60 days. Keys on the counter. I meant it. She texted me a picture of her shoulder brace later that day with a caption that was just fun. I responded with keep it clean. Ice helps. It was the first time in months we had exchanged words with no hidden knives. I surprised myself by not searching for the ones that weren't there. 2 nights later, I did something that felt a lot like an exorcism and a lot like a return. I pulled my bike out, the one I haven't ridden since all of this started, because I didn't trust my head not to turn me into a smear on the asphalt. I checked the tires, checked the chain, checked myself. Then, when the sun dipped and the air went cool and thin, I put on my helmet and I rode. Not to chase her, not to chase anything. I just rode. The city at night has always felt like a secret only the stubborn deserve, and it welcomed me back like I'd been forgiven. I hit a familiar stretch where the road curves around a small lake and you can see the stars if you remember to look up. For the first time in a long time, I heard my own engine and not the noise around it. I caught myself smiling under the visor. It was small, and it was mine. I don't know what she'll do next. I don't know what he'll be to her. I do know the sound of a nurse typing a new name into a line that used to be mine, and the way it can sound like closure instead of catastrophe. I know what my house sounds like when the fridge kicks on in the middle of the night. I know the exact weight of my cat's ashes in the little wooden box the vet gave me, and I put them on the shelf by the door so he's the first one who sees me leave and the first one who sees me come home. It's not the future I thought I'd have, but for the first time, I'm not standing in the doorway afraid of the quiet. I'm stepping into it. I'm hearing it answer back. Update 3. I thought the universe might give me a quiet week. It gave me a stack of paper instead. A deputy knocked just after 9 on a Tuesday, polite, businesslike, the badge catching the morning light that sneaks under my blinds. He said my name and handed over a manila envelope that felt heavier than it was. Inside, an emergency motion for temporary support, a request to freeze assets, a list of dates and signatures where my name appeared like a piece of furniture in a room I'd moved out of. The declaration leaned hard on her injury, on the separation, on the fact that I had unilaterally begun closing accounts. It asked for numbers that made my vision go white at the edges for a second. The last page was a notice for a hearing 48 hours later. The little checklist box next to ex-party was ticked. My coffee had gone cold by the time I remembered to drink it. There wasn't rage. Not the kind that makes you punch a wall and then apologize to drywall. Just this clean, bracing cold that felt a lot like jumping in the river in April. I called the mediator. Then I called an attorney. I ironed a shirt I didn't really need to iron and sat in a waiting room that smelled like carpet cleaner until a woman with a quick mind and a pen she clearly loved told me what would happen and what would not. It will feel unfair, she said, not unkindly. It might even be. But it's a step on a path, not the last mile. Courtrooms never look like they do in movies. They're too bright, too beige, with a hum in the ducts that makes everyone's voices sound thinner. She arrived in a sling and a dress I'd seen a dozen times at weddings and friends' birthdays, with a guy in a denim jacket hovering a half step behind her like a shadow that hadn't decided what shape to take yet. He didn't look up when we glanced past each other. Her lawyer did. So many file folders. So many tabs. My attorney squeezed my forearm once, and we stood when the judge came in. It wasn't a war. It was a calendar exercise with people's lives stapled to it. Numbers talked to numbers. Medical notes were passed up. My bike accident insurance card was mentioned and then set aside. The phrase status quo got a lot of play. The judge looked at me twice, at her twice, and picked a number for temporary support that wasn't the worst case scenario and wasn't what I would have chosen if the world were built to my specifications. He signed the order to hold off on selling the old place until the temporary orders got converted into a plan. 60 days became we'll see, and I let myself exhale through my nose and not more than that. On the way out, someone's heel caught the edge of a runner, and the sound made half the room flinch. It felt fitting. She caught up to me in the hallway with the kind of pace you only have when one arm is useless. I didn't, she started, and then she did that thing where she presses her lips together to hold a sentence still. They said this was the way. You signed it, I said. Not sharp. Just a thing that is either true or not. Her eyes were glossy without tears, like the meniscus was holding. I'm scared, she said, so quietly I almost missed it over the air conditioning. I can't work for weeks. I know, I said, and I did. And I'm not your husband. She blinked like I'd flipped a light switch. Right, she said. Right. The tow yard called me an hour later because the wrecked bike was still in my name. If I didn't get it out by Thursday, storage charges turned into a lien, and suddenly I had a new thing too. Add to the list of stupid ways to ruin your credit. The address was the kind of industrial stretch where weekends go to die, a grid of chain link, sun-bleached signs, oil-stained concrete. The woman at the window wore nails the color of candy and had seen 1,000 men like me press their fingers to tempered glass. Signature here, she said, sliding paper through the slot. And again. And here. The bike looked smaller on the cracked asphalt than it ever did on the road. Bars bent, foot peg snapped. A faint smear of pink on the throttle grip that made my stomach lurch before my brain reminded me it was probably just dirt. He was there again, the denim jacket guy, hands in pockets, trying not to exist too loudly. Up close he looked tired in the way that happens behind your eyes, not on your skin. He kept the right amount of distance and didn't try to add any useless words to a space that didn't want them. They said you had to sign, he said finally, nodding toward the bike like it had the answer. I didn't know if I should. Push. I didn't want to. It's fine, I said. We'll get it loaded. She should file the transfer as soon as she can. He nodded and moved like someone who has hauled heavy, awkward things but still respects gravity. We slid the front wheel onto the ramp of his trailer. The fork let out a low, offended squeal when it took weight. He winced like it hurt him. "For what it's worth," he said, and I braced because that sentence is almost always junk. "I didn't know about you at first." She made it sound like, he stopped. Searched the air for a word that wouldn't make anything worse. "I'm not trying to. I'm just saying I'm not proud of it." "Okay," I said, and let him have the mercy of that being enough. Under the seat, where the registration lives with the little useless factory toolkit, there was a folded napkin with the name of a diner we'd both pretended not to remember. I took the papers and left the napkin where it was. Titles are for DMV clerks, not poets. On the way back to the truck, the tow yard woman leaned out of her window. "You know," she said, almost conspiratorial, "everybody tells me this isn't me when they're standing where you're standing. Then a month later they're back and it's still them. Good luck, baby." It was the kindest, oddest benediction I've gotten from behind bulletproof glass. The house had to wait. The judge's order meant I couldn't throw a for sale sign in the lawn and be done with it. So instead of boxing my past, I did something small I'd been avoiding. I took my cat's ashes to the overlook. The box is heavier than it looks and too pretty for what it holds. The air was clean and cool, with that almost electric feeling before dark fully settles. I put my palms on the stone and said his name once. I didn't mean to say anything else, but I heard myself thank him for teaching me to sit still. I let a little bit of ash pinch between two fingers and ride the wind down to the river until it wasn't anything I could see anymore. A tiny boy with his dad pointed at my bike in the parking lot and said, "That one goes fast," and the dad said, "Only as fast as the person lets it." It felt like a fortune cookie written specifically for me and dressed up like parenting. That night, a text buzzed while I was chopping an onion too slowly. Unknown number again, but the tone was familiar. "Thank you for today," it read. "I'll make sure she files. I'll. Take care." It wasn't from her. I put the phone down next to the cutting board and let it go dark without answering. The next morning, my new neighbor stepped into the shared strip of lawn with a cardboard box and a helmet tucked under her arm. Early 50s, hair in a practical knot, grease under her nails. "Hey," she said, cheerful in the way people get when they've decided to be self-sufficient to a fault. "You look like someone who actually knows what lacing looks like." She flicked her chin toward her garage. Inside, under a canvas drop cloth, was a vintage CB350 that smelled exactly like every good decision I've ever made, old gas and dust and trouble. "It belonged to my husband," she said. "It hasn't run in 5 years. I'm tired of it being a shrine." We pulled the plugs and drained the bowls and did small rituals with rubber hoses and patience. She told me about him in sentences that landed like facts, not like pleas, a man who liked things that worked and fixed them when they didn't until the one thing he couldn't fix won. When the carbs finally coughed and caught, she put her hand over her mouth and laughed through it. We idled circles in the cul-de-sac like teenagers sneaking joy out of an ordinary Wednesday. She killed the engine and looked at me. "It's good to have something that starts when you ask it to," she said, and there wasn't a molecule of subtext in it, which felt like a blessing. Tonight the fridge kicked on and I noticed without flinching. The papers are in a neat stack on my kitchen table, not an altar but not junk mail either. The court will do what it does, and I'll do what I do. I'll write checks I don't want to write for a while. I'll untangle titles. I'll keep my word about things I said out loud in a sterile room. I'll ride when my head is quiet enough to deserve it. I'll keep the little wooden box by the door, and I'll touch it when I leave because small rituals are how you build a life when the big ones fall apart. There's a voice that's been loud for months that keeps asking if I'm the bad guy in someone else's story. Today it switched to a whisper and then to something even better, silence. The quiet I'm stepping into has a shape now. It sounds like a carb sinking right, like a judge's pen scratching across paper, like a deputy's good luck as the door swings closed, like an old bike firing up after years. I can live with those sounds. I can build around them. I am, whether I mean to or not. Update 4. The first truly quiet morning in a while arrived in the shape of a dead battery. Not mine, hers. The old key fob to the house we used to share had given up, and the alarm company pinged me because my name is still the one on the contract that lives in a server somewhere and refuses to accept new realities. I stood in my kitchen with a spoon in the honey jar, phone to my ear, watching dust move in a beam of sun like snow at a speed you can actually see. The rep said I had two choices: remove myself now and let the house chirp helplessly until she figured it out, or go press the buttons like I used to. I stared at my hand with the spoon in it and figured my capacity for doing one last small thing hadn't been totally spent. I went. The alarm made that needy sound when I opened the door, a tone that used to annoy me and now just sounded like an old habit I was allowed to end. I punched in the code. The hallway smelled faintly of eucalyptus and detergent and the ghost of our cat. A vase I didn't recognize sat on the console table like a placeholder in a catalog photo. I swapped the battery out with the same little twist and click I taught myself in a YouTube video 3 years ago and stood there holding the dead 9-volt like it might explode and solve everything. I put it in the trash and locked up and walked away. Clean. At noon, my lawyer texted me a time and an address, and the day tilted hard. Her office again, but a different conference room, this one with a plant that had gotten too tall for its corner and leaned toward the window like it had an appointment it couldn't miss. She came with her arm out of the sling and a stiffness that made sitting look like arithmetic. Her lawyer did the talking until she didn't. It was a simple sentence with a pressure wave behind it. "I'm pregnant," she said, and the word unfurled in the room like something that had its own gravity. There is a particular kind of silence that belongs only to HVAC. It filled the space while my brain did the blast radius math, dates, the last time our bodies knew each other, months and a lifetime ago, the way the law scribbles lines through biology and calls it presumption, the way you can be a footnote in a story and still be listed on the title page. My attorney's pen didn't pause. "We'll need language," she said, calm as a metronome, "to establish non-paternity in the decree. Test after birth. Clear lines." The other attorney nodded, and a paragraph was promised that would keep a future version of me from writing checks for a child that was never mine. It was all so civilized it made my teeth ache. She didn't look at me when she said, "It's his." She meant Denim Jacket, the man who had become a shadow with a shape. "He knows," she added, and then for the first time since any of this started there was shame in her voice instead of anger. Not for the act, I think, but for the fact of the room we were in, how small it made everything good feel. "I didn't plan," she started, and stopped. My hands were flat on the table, palms down, like I could keep us all from sliding off if I distributed my weight correctly. "We'll do the test," I said, because that's what you say when you're standing in a field watching whether you can't control move across it. "We'll write the paragraph. We'll make it clean." She nodded and swiped at the corner of her eye with the heel of her hand like that would press it all back in. I left with a neat stack of papers and a headache that felt like it had been calibrated by a professional. The world outside had the nerve to be bright and blue. I got in my truck and drove without aim and ended up at the range behind the community college where the MSF classes run on weekends. Cones laid out like punctuation, red and blue and white commas on gray asphalt. The instructor was a guy with forearms like braided rope and a voice that could cut through wind without shouting. I watched from the fence for 20 minutes and felt my jaw unclench at the sight of three strangers find the friction zone for the first time, fists loosening, shoulders dropping, machines becoming manageable instead of monsters. When he waved me over, I didn't even pretend I hadn't been hovering. "You looking or helping?" he asked. "Helping if you'll have me," I said, and for the first time in months I felt competent on purpose. He handed me a clipboard and a roll of tape and pointed at a kid who kept stalling because he was scared of doing anything too decisively. "Go make him trust his left hand," he said. I did, and then I did it again for someone else, and the 2 hours I remained there arranged themselves into something that looked suspiciously like the outline of a life. On my way home, the tow yard woman's "Good luck, baby" ran through my head like a song you finally admit you like. I stopped at the shelter on the edge of town because I had started to drive past it and then found my hands flicking the blinker as if they had decided for me. The place was all concrete and chain link and an antiseptic smell that fought with a deeper musk of fur and bleach and hope. I told the volunteer I wasn't ready for a chaos machine. She pointed me to a back corner where a 10-year-old tabby had been pretending to be a folded towel for weeks. He regarded me with the suspicion of a creature who has learned the precise ratio of attention to danger. "I'm not replacing anyone," I told him, because saying it out loud made me feel less like I was stealing. When I opened the kennel, he stepped out, put one paw on my thigh, and then settled his entire ridiculous weight into my lap like we'd been doing this a decade. I signed the papers with the same hand I'd used to sign proceedings that morning. He rode home in a cardboard carrier that said "Live Animal" in block type and made conversational comments that sounded like creaky furniture. I named him Clutch because I'm not subtle and because he leaned into my palm the first time I pressed it to his head and held. That night, a text came in from a number I had saved and then deleted and then saved under a name that wasn't a name. It was a simple sentence: "I'm going to do right by this." No punctuation. Denim Jacket, with his careful words. I didn't answer because there was nothing to say that wouldn't turn into a rope around somebody. Instead, I set a reminder on my phone for a date next spring with a single word: test. It felt clinical and cold and like the only way to be warm in the long run. The following afternoon turned into one of those sideways comedy routines the universe produces when it's bored. The alarm company technician needed inside again because the panel wouldn't push the update remotely. I met him there because the contract is still a leash, and while we were waiting on a reboot, the front door swung open and a woman with my mother-in-law's haircut but not my mother-in-law's face stepped in, like she owned the oxygen. "You must be him," she said, and before I could figure out which him she meant, she introduced herself as the landlord the neighbor had called to complain about the bikes. "You're the owner," she said, stabbing the air with a manicured finger, "so you're the one I talked to." It was like being yelled at by a PTA while standing in your own foyer. She wanted to know when the for sale sign was coming, whether the prospective buyers would be noise people, if we planned to disclose that the lady had crashed a motorcycle. I stood there, slowly discovering new muscles in my face that could hold a neutral expression. "Ma'am," I said finally, "there is no sign. There is a court order. There will be disclosures. You'll be fine." It made her huff in a way that paid me back for years of passive-aggressive HOA emails. The tech finished. The panel stopped its needy chirp. The landlord did not get the show she'd paid for with her outrage. I walked out into the sun and felt, for a second, like I was the one with the keys to everything I used to hand someone else. 2 days later, the riding community put together one of those traffic stopping memorial processions for a member I only knew through nods at gas stations and a shared wave at a stoplight. I went because he had the same model helmet as me and because the first rule when you ride is, you show up. She came, too, with her arms still guarded and the man in the jacket hovering a respectful step behind. It could have been a circus. It wasn't. Engines idled in a harmony that forgives bad timing. We filled a lane like a current, past the spot where we used to gas up, across the bridge that always gets the crosswind wrong. I held my speed, pointed my chin at the horizon, and when we stopped at the overlook for the photo nobody wants to be in, she caught my eye and gave me the smallest nod I have ever seen. Not apology. Not triumph. Just a recognition that sometimes you both kept the shiny side up through a stretch of road that wanted you in a ditch. It was enough. In the evening, back home, Clutch discovered my new couch is exactly the right height for his claws and I discovered I still have the reflexes to keep a thing I love from destroying another thing I love without turning it into a fight. I put a scratching post near the window. He pretended it had been his plan all along and informed the birds of their inferiority. The last piece of the week arrived folded into an email with more legal words than regular ones. Draft decree, revisions in red, the paragraph my attorney promised with the exhale in it, a clean lane between me and a child that will come into this messy world with nothing but rights and a fist. Sign when ready, she typed, which is a sentence that sounds patient and is actually a clock. I read it 3 times. I put my phone down. I picked it up again and wrote back, make the paragraph stronger. She did, and when I signed, the pen felt like a tool, not a weapon. There's a lot I can't control. A baby is going to show up who will not be mine and I will not be cruel about that. A house will sell when a judge and a calendar decide it's allowed. Money will leave my account for a while and I will not mistake that for my worth leaving with it. What I can do is this, show up to the range on Saturday with a box of cones and a pocket full of tape, teach a stranger to trust his left hand, come home to a cat who decided to keep me, and sleep under a roof that only smells like paint and my own soap.